Good morning to all of you. We are going to start this event on the COVID-19's impact in the Spanish fisheries market. It has been organized by EUMOFA, which is the European Observatory of Fisheries and Aquaculture Sectors. I imagine all of you know this observatory. It has been created by the European Commission to have a market intelligence tool and know the evolution of the fisheries and aquaculture products, their prices in a transparent way. Also to help taking decisions to the administrations and as a tool for companies to establish their business plans, their forecasts, etc. EUMOFA is a very good tool. We use it a lot in CETMAR, and we have an expert there who collaborates with data from the Atlantic. We usually use this tool as well as the other administrations. So we invite you to use it, to check it, and every time you receive the newsletters and all the documentations, you get familiar with it because it's extremely useful. EUMOFA is organizing this event in collaboration with the regional government of the sea. And usually they invite experts from the fisheries and aquaculture sector and of the value chain to discuss on the competitiveness of these markets and sectors. EUMOFA also took into account the effects of this pandemic that I hope is finishing and has had a severe impact in this sector, which is quite vulnerable to these type of shocks. And as you know, helping them to leave that situation, not only with its resilience capacity, but also with the support of the administration. That's why EUMOFA has brought together here today experts from the three administrations. We have the European Union, the government of Spain, the Ministry of Fisheries and Aquaculture of Spain, and the Regional Ministry of the Sea of Xunta de Galicia. So this is a unique opportunity to know the measures that have been taken at the three administrative levels and how the sector has reacted to them. And also we will discuss at the end which may be the new challenges and the new measures to be taken in the future for this sector to finally leave this crisis and be reinforced thanks to these measures. That's why we will have experts and representatives of the administration. We will have Mercedes Rodríguez Moreda, General Director for Fisheries, Aquaculture and Technological Innovation of the Regional Ministry for Maritime Affairs of the Xunta de Galicia. She will open the conference, and then we will have a panel of members which include Christoph van de Weyer, Policy Officer of Markets of the European Commission, Juan Manuel Elices Lopez, Deputy Head of Unit of the General Subdirectorate of Aquaculture, Fisheries, Marketing and Structural Actions of the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food, and Marta Villaverde, General Subdirector of the Regional Ministry for Maritime Affairs, and also Jan Erik, Senior Analyst of EUMOFA. And we will finish with closing speeches by the General Director of the Directorate General for Fisheries Management and Aquaculture, Mr. Juan Ignacio Gandaria Serrano, and the Regional Minister for Maritime Affairs, Rosa Quintana Carballo. So we are going to open this event. It is a pleasure to have Mercedes Rodríguez Moreda, General Director of the Regional Ministry for Maritime Affairs of the Xunta de Galicia. Good morning to all of you. First of all, I would like to address my first words to apologize on behalf of the Regional Minister of the Sea, as she had some agenda problems, but given the importance of the topic that we are discussing here today, she will join us at the end of this panel. I would like to welcome the representatives of the European Commission and the representatives of the General Secretariat of the Ministry, especially Ignacio Gandarias, General Director, who is with us today. And I would like to thank EUMOFA for being here, because they have prepared a very interesting study, and they have thought about CONXEMAR and this stand of the Xunta de Galicia to inform about the results. We believe it's very important to conduct these studies because it informs about the European, Spanish, and Galician sector that during the pandemic, as an essential activity, they were working there all the time. They ensured the supply of first quality marine products to the markets. Today, they will demonstrate that this fisheries activity had a big impact because of the pandemic. As we will see during this event in Galicia, we have boosted different activities and actions, talking with the stakeholders at European, Spanish, and regional level to develop initiatives of all types to reduce as much as possible the serious situation of our producers. We understand that we have to be close to the sector, helping them in these hard times, and help them to continue working and being sustainable and profitable, supplying us with fisheries and aquaculture products that we need for our diet, and also very necessary for our health. We need to invest in promotion campaigns for the general public to know how good fisheries and aquaculture products are for them, fighting also to maintain the income of producers, especially of small fisheries, which is very important for Galicia. I hope you enjoy this event and this roundtable, and it will be very successful thanks to the speakers and the attendants. Thank you very much. We are going to start with Jan-Erik of the EUMOFA team, who is going to introduce this platform.
First of all, it's nice to be back at the CONXEMAR, and I think most of the companies attending this year at the show thinks the same. In my talk, I would like to share some observations and findings from the work EUMOFA has done related to the COVID-19 pandemic, both for the EU in general and for Spain, and examples on how EUMOFA supported industry stakeholders. The pandemics has impacted the industry, but the impact were biggest in the first phase of the pandemic, where local fishers were hit the hardest, as their main market segment, the HoReCa segment, virtually closed down. And local fishers were hit the hardest also because there were a significant fall in their prices. And some of them, in some EU countries, didn't manage to sell their catch at all. Small processing companies, traders and distributors were also impacted. And other parts of the seafood industry also had significant losses, and then referring to especially to those who were in the fresh market, and for those selling fresh and live products to overseas market. Those dependent on air freight were impacted because the number of flights were reduced, flights were irregular, and also the freight costs was high. And seafood competed against demand for freight for medical equipment as well, which also complicated the situation. While seafood targeting the restaurant and catering market suffered strongly, those targeting the retail segment were in a far better position. In most member states, the lockdown led to a big change in consumption patterns from the HoReCa consumption over to retail. And that also contributed to a positive growth in consumption when talking to volumes in some segment. And in fact, in some segment, the HoReCa or the retail segment compensated for losses in other segments as well. So how has the pandemic impacted on the Spanish seafood sector? From a market perspective and from the EUMOFA perspective, the impacts follow some of the same patterns as for the rest of Europe. But due to the importance of the industry in Spain, reports from stakeholders indicate that likely the Spanish industry were not that much impacted as other member states. We observe, however, lower price achievement in 2020 compared with the pre-COVID price levels, but there are still examples of higher and lower prices achieved in the market. It could be discussed, though, if it's correct to compare with the prices and the situation in 2019, because it seems to be an exceptional good year in terms of both volume traded, exported, imported, and prices. But still, that's the best reference we have. So data from the EUMOFA database show that first sales in Spain in 2020 dropped by 5% compared with 2019, and the price dropped by 7%. That is for sales, first sales. When it comes to trading, export, overall exports of fishery products from Spain were down by 2% in 2020, and 3% in terms of prices. And when it comes to the fresh part of the export, it was hit the hardest with a drop of 14%. So that's quite huge. The frozen exports of frozen were not that hard hit, but maybe the sector or the product less impacted by the pandemic was the canned product, and within that category, the canned tuna sector. If we look at the import side, and Spain is also dependent on certain imports, imports from in 2020 compared with 2019 dropped by 6%, both in volume and value. So, but not included in those figures I presented is the actual cost. What has the pandemic done with the cost through the whole value chain for seafood, both in the EU and in the Spain? We don't know yet because there are not any good figures on that. But based on the reports we have received from stakeholders, from companies, from persons, there is a significant increase in the cost level, both in the first part of the pandemic and also in the up to now. The only cost factor which is lower is likely the fuel cost, which has been on a low level, at least in the first part of the pandemic. So, based on the significant impact from the COVID-19 pandemic, EUMOFA started regular reporting, weekly reporting of to the European Commission on the negative impacts on the COVID-19 pandemic. And the first report were presented or reported to the European Commission in March 2020, and we continued on a weekly basis for many weeks. And all the findings in those reports were shortly after published and made available for stakeholders in the industry. Also, the results from the COVID-19 reporting, the findings were also summarized in case studies in EUMOFA publications. So this reporting continued up to July 2020, when we stopped reporting, when things are kind of normalized. But we continued as due to the second wave of COVID-19 reporting. We continued reporting as from March 2021 on a bi-weekly basis. And this kind of reporting is also published on the EUMOFA website, and it is still ongoing. And finally, in addition to this kind of reporting, we have, based on requests from organizations and companies in the EU, I conducted studies on the impact on COVID-19 for different sectors and different products. We have done some up to now, and we will conduct more studies in the fourth quarter of 2021. And the purpose of those studies is to describe the different sectors, how they were impacted, and provide insights and success criteria so other countries, other sectors could be able to learn from what has been done in other sectors. So that was my introduction.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question for you because you have talked about the subsectors of fisheries. You mentioned the frozen sector, and in this exhibition, the frozen sector is the main character. And we would like you to talk a little bit more about the impact of the pandemic in this frozen sector.
Yes, I will be happy to. The frozen sectors, as I said, was less impacted than the fresh, but still, it isn't like that the frozen sector was impacted that way and the fresh that way. It depends on the company. It depends on what market segments are targeted, kind of species, and so on. For those companies already targeted the retail sector, the impact was far less than the companies in the frozen sector targeting the HoReCa segment or other segments, or overseas segments also were to a huge degree impacted. So there is no clear answer how, but we know that the companies were impacted differently. And the large, I think that you can also divide between large and small companies. The larger ones already had products for the retail, the large scale, were in the large scale retail, were impacted the least due to the increasing demand. And for those who were in the HoReCa segment, it took time to switch and find new market, new buyers. But still, if you are in the frozen, you have more time to think. You can store the fish, and it was better to be in the frozen segment compared with those in the fresh.
Yes. We will have the opportunity to see in the different stands if the frozen products as a commodity adapts to what the consumer wants now after the changes of the pandemic. Another question for you would be, how would you assess the role of an observatory like EUMOFA to assess and guide the administrations or companies?
The way we have worked so far is that we have talked to POs and the industry, all kind of stakeholders during the pandemic. We have reported what they had to report about their constraints, about the obstacles, and we have gathered this information and we have published it, shared it with the other sectors, other POs. Also, we have reported to the European Commission. So I think the sharing of information, sharing the good ideas, the success stories is important in order to see market opportunities for different industries. So I think that's the main role. And also our objective is to collect data, which also you can from which you can also measure the actual impact by looking at price trends and volume trends, and also do your own opinion on how the sector is impacted and how support regimes could be, how the industry could be supported.
Thank you very much. And now we have the same question to the other speakers. How would you assess, from the perspective of the Xunta or the European Union or the Ministry, how do you assess having this EUMOFA tool to take decisions and define policies? We are going to start with the Ministry, please. Good morning. Market observatories are a perfect tool to identify the concerns and the first problems in the market, and that enables us to take quick decisions to redirect those problems. In the case of EUMOFA, not only we have information about the impact on the market of any activity, but also we know the impact at European level, and that helps us a lot to know what is going on in other member states and how it is impacting, the pandemic is impacting to other member states in order to take decisions. And that permits to focus on looking for the problems that are affecting the others, and according to the EUMOFA reports, we know where the problems are. So they were very useful at both national level and to compare the trends and problems of other member states. For the Xunta de Galicia, can you hear me? Yes, okay. So it is very interesting to have a price observatory, and for first sales details of fresh products, we have our own tool, which is the Fisheries Technology platform. I will talk about it later. And we have a historical series of more than 20 years where we collect all the data of the fish auction markets, of volume and value. So for us, in order to take decisions, it is an essential tool, and we are so used to it that it's complicated to work without it. As for the platform, it helps to have a reference on first sales, and we think it's very interesting to have a national observatory for prices of the consumer. We know the production prices, we know the prices paid to producers, but having an observatory concerning the consumer prices by segments is very interesting, and it could help us to analyze those differences and price increases. And as for the EUMOFA tool, it's extremely useful because we can compare and we can know what is going on. We can compare our data with other realities, and we can be more critical with our own reality and identifying problems or get ahead to other problems that are taking place in other territories, and maybe you can take decisions before your country is hit it. And what about the European Commission? How do you assess this tool and its utility to take decisions?
If I can remove my mask. Okay. Well, just to complement what the colleagues just explained, I would say the most obvious added value of an observatory at European level is that there are no alternatives. There are, of course, national observatories that may be quite sophisticated, but they are nationals, and even two countries having market observatories would not provide directly comparable data. Whereas here, the EUMOFA, clearly we have harmonized methodologies that make it possible to compare market data across countries, but also all along the value chain. Because I mentioned the national observatories, we also have observatories or at least reporting capacities at sectoral level. But these reportings would only serve the interest of a particular sector and sometimes for a particular country. So there also the added value of a European observatory is this, I would say, transversal and horizontal ability to provide data on the market developments at all levels. All those data are available for free to all users, and we have continuously the publication of very high-level studies that are made to the interest of the public in general, of the sector, but to the interest of the public in general, not serving a particular company or a particular branch. And as of today, we can really consider that EUMOFA has become the reference market observatory of the food commodities. So from that point of view, I think it's a big success, and probably there is no other alternative on the market, as I just said. Thank you.
That's true. So we have seen this vision of the European Commission, and now we are going to move to the ministry. Juan Manuel Elices Lopez is going to talk now, and he's going to talk about the indicators of the COVID-19's impact in the Spanish market. Good morning to all of you. First of all, I would like to thank EUMOFA for organizing this event, the Commission for supporting it, and the Xunta for hosting this event at this CONXEMAR Exhibition, which is a great space to have this EUMOFA Talk. So, I'm going to talk about the impact at national level according to the data that we have, and it's going to be a comparative analysis. I would like to start with the production sector, which has been impacted at different levels in the national territory, although at global terms we could say that there has been a decrease in comparison to 2019 of 7% in the volume of sales and 11% in value. This involves more than 200 euros less. It has been different because if we analyze it in detail, there are some regions like Catalonia or the Basque Country that have suffered more the effects of the COVID. We find average values of 20% loss in some regions, but when we talk about value in the Basque Country, the impact has reached 25% in the value of sales. All these impacts have been higher during the first months of the pandemic, March, April, when Spain was also in lockdown. But as I was saying, it has been different because we have other regions like Asturias or Murcia that have seen how their volumes and values have been increased during this period. Volumes in a lower degree than values. For example, in Asturias, 50% more of value has been sold on first sale, but the economic impact has been very low. And now we will see why. In Galicia, as we are here, we would like to say that this region is the most important at national level when we talk about the volume and value of sales. And even if it does not highlight as one of the most impacted regions by the pandemic, volume has been reduced by 4.5%, and it has fallen by 13% when we talk about economic values. That would be 100 million euros according to our data. These differences that we can see in the impact of on volume and value are due to the decrease of average prices of the main species because of the Eureka closure that has affected species that were sold in that channel. The impact on the average price of species has not been the same. We find species that have lost an important value, such as sardine, which has been whose value has been reduced by 35%, or mackerel whose value has been reduced also. On the other hand, we also find species that have increased their average price and average value, but around 10-15% increase in price. As for the type of fisheries, the long line surface fisheries has been especially affected, with a loss of 30% in their sales, and it has been mainly due to all the problems that impacted the high sea species because of the changes of crews and the ports, but also because of the reduction in the average price of one of their main species. And this has made this fleet being impacted so considerably. Mako shark has reduced its value a lot, and then when we talk about external market, it has also go on backwards. When we talk about the exports, they have fallen by 5%, and imports decreased by 12%, more than 800 million euros. When we talk about the type of products, we highlight the exports of canned products that have played an important role in this fall, and there has been also a drop in fisheries products, especially the imports of fisheries products. As I was saying, canned products behaved quite well, not only in the foreign market but also in the national market, because they've been one of the most consumed products during the pandemic. Finally, to analyze all these sectors, I would like to highlight the important change in the behavior of the consumer. There has been an increase in the household consumption during the COVID pandemic, breaking the negative trend that had been accumulated in the average consumption of fish per inhabitant, reaching in 2020 more than 25 kilograms per inhabitant and year, and that is an increase of 10%. Even if this has not offset the losses of the Horeca sector, it has been good for the fisheries sector. Analyzing the impact, I would like to analyze the policies that have been implemented to help the sectors. To reduce the effects, subsidies have been distributed between the state and autonomous regions. The administration has focused on the fleet and regions that work on fisheries and aquaculture. A big amount of the funding has came from the Fisheries and European and Maritime, from the FEMP. That has provided the funds required for this situation, and also there were state aids. As for this FEMP, they have provided 30 million euros during the COVID, and the call for aids has been of more than 50 million euros. So there are still aids that have not been used. The main subsidies by the state have been the temporary cessation of the fleet as a result of the COVID impact. The Marine Social Institute has also provided different aids amounting to 15 million euros, and some of them have not been distributed. We consider that it is because some of the affected parties have not applied for them, and because of the subsidies given by other regions and were not compatible. That's why they could not receive aids from both sides. We would also like to highlight the aids for storage, for which the regulations had to be also modified, and 9 million euros have been given to 9 producers' organizations. And finally, I would like to highlight the aids to production plants, amending the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund to give more access to the subsidies. And because of the COVID in Spain, for the first time, the Secretariat General of Fisheries called for early aids for the production organizations to conduct their tasks. Again, of the 10 millions available, only 6 million euros were consumed because of the COVID that has kept affecting them. They could not use all the resources and all the money available. I would like to end by saying that according to the experience that we have, the administration has developed the Recovery, Transformation and Resilience Plan to promote sustainability, research, innovation and digitalization of the fishing sector. And that's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Juan Manuel. To summarize a little bit, so how do you assess the role of the administrations in this pandemic? Very short. So I would like to apologize, but I had so much to say. I think that the administrations, European, national and regional, have worked so much since the beginning of the pandemic. We need to take into account that as we have been affected also by the situation, we've been in a lockdown, we had to use the tools that we had to work to give value to the fisheries products, and we have worked so hard. We've been able to develop in coordination with the European Commission, the European Fisheries Fund. We have amended the regulations in so quickly. 1 month after the lockdown, we had the regulations amended, and that's a very short period of time. Also, the administrations have followed and monitored every day the problems, and we have tried to solve them, that they were appearing every day. This was new for all of us, and we didn't know how it was going to evolve. And finally, we tried to coordinate and manage the subsidies and give them as soon as possible for the money to arrive to the sector. So I think that we worked well. Thank you. Marta, I know you're going to talk about how the autonomous government has worked. How do you assess the role of the Xunta in this crisis? I think we have also worked well. I agree that the administration exists as an organization, but we are people, and we also suffered the pandemic. And all our departments had to be in a lockdown too. I would like to highlight the role played by the Xunta when developing IT tools, so we could all be working the next day at the same level or a higher level than before when we were at the office. And apart from analyzing data, monitoring, being in contact with the sector, we were in contact with the sector all the time. We talk a lot. And during those moments of crisis, the contact was even more intense, and being at home, it wasn't that easy. Then we also monitored even more data. We identified needs, points of action where the response needs to be quick. So the Xunta kept working as we were working every day with our helplines, our administrative proceedings. We kept doing our work, and in addition, we launched different subsidy lines that some of them were issued in the second semester of 2020, and they were paid before the year ended. We made the money arrive to the, for example, to the surface longline fleet, we gave them 3 million euros, and before the end of the year, they had received the money. So I think the administrations have worked very well. The public employees have worked very well, and we have to remember that we are people. Christophe, what about the Commission? What would you say after this analysis of the ministry and the regional ministry? How do you assess, or which measures, what have you learned? What have you learned in common for all Europe?
Well, I would say that several lessons are exactly the same that those that were shared at a national or regional level. Maybe a first thing is that we haven't noticed shortages of fisheries and aquaculture products on the market. And this is something that is particular because it was not the same for other food commodities. So that is the first lesson that we have learned. Also, we observed a strong resilience and a strong capacity of the sector to adapt to the situation. And in the end, as it was already mentioned, the sector remains profitable. This is not also true for all food sectors. So the lessons learned, and it was already mentioned, again, the key role of producer organizations to very rapidly adapt the activities of their members during the crisis and also manage the storage operations. Another lesson is the ability of the market to shift rapidly to alternative market outlets like the e-commerce, like the takeaway, like the promotion of short circuits, etc., etc. That was also a very prompt reaction from the market, and it's also a lesson that we learned from the crisis. And as it was underlined also earlier, the importance of close contacts. And I'm mentioning it because it's also not true for all food sectors. We know at Commission level, of course, but we know our stakeholders, they know us, so they can rapidly contact us, we can rapidly contact them, and this really helped to know their needs and to, let's say, identify the most adequate measures that can be proposed at our level. And this was also mentioned, the ability of the Commission, and it's sometimes worth to underline it, the ability of the Commission and of the institutions to adopt quite rapidly measures. You know that sometimes it may take centuries, and when all institutions are really working in the same direction, understanding clearly what are the priorities, we can go extremely fast, and that was the case here. Maybe a big unknown is to what extent the consumers' habits will have changed and will continue, and will have changed, I would say, on the long term. We saw that they have changed due to the lockdown and the crisis, but whether this will have an impact on the long term, this is still the unknown, and that is something that we will have to analyze in the future.
Thank you very much, Christophe. We are going to listen now to the presentation of Marta Villaverde. We are going to listen to the perspective of the regional government of Galicia and what they have done to reduce the impact in Galicia and how they have worked and helped with their measures to increase the resilience of the sector. I would like to thank EUMOFA for inviting us to this event and to give the opinion and what happened in our region and what we have lived during this pandemic and this recovery. Before I give you data and percentages, I would like to start by giving you two details that are important. One of them has been mentioned by Christophe, which is the capacity to adapt of our fisheries sector. That quality of that resilience quality is something inherent to the fisheries and aquaculture sector. They adapt. The environment where they work is not very friendly. It's humid, it's cold, sometimes the weather conditions are very harsh, and they are used to adapt to the situation, to the changes in the market, etc. So during this crisis, we've seen that this resilience capacity helped them to reorganize on a continuous basis. We've seen how the shellfish gatherers made shifts. We've seen how the fish auction markets organized the auctions in different shifts, different timetables to comply with the number of people that could be there. We've seen how the crews on board had to be reduced and their working hours. So we've seen a lot of changes and evolution when the health measures were changing. And this means that fish was available in the market. Without this adaptation capacity of the sector, it could have been impossible to bring fish to the auction market, and the data could have been lower than how they are. Something else that I would like to say is the contact that we keep with the sector. We are aware of this unfriendly environment to develop the activity, and now that some obligations of the common fisheries policy need to be complied with, we've been aware, and in 2003 we created a technological platform of fisheries to develop different tools to provide the sector with information and help them comply with the obligations, with traceability documents, communication of first sales data, aquaculture production statements, and this has helped the sector to comply with its obligations, and we've been able to create a monitoring system almost in real time that enables us to have detailed information of the evolution of the amounts and of the economic value of all those sales and the movements, the trade channels that we have in our autonomous region. So, having said all of this, I think I can start talking about figures. In general, I'm going to, the figures that I'm going to give you are first sales in the fresh fish auction market. Why? Because that has been the sector that has been more impacted by this crisis, and the one that has been more reduced. So from a general point of view, we can see the number of sales operations that have been produced in the fish auction markets. We've seen that the first sales have been reduced. In the last few years, we had around 4.5 million operations of first sales in our fish auction markets, and in 2020 we closed with 3.8 million. So these sales operations have been reduced, and the biggest drop was in April, when in comparison to April 2019 the first sales operations were reduced by 50%, so the auction markets were reducing their activity. We could monitor the first sales activity in those fish auction markets. As for the landing volume, the details are the same as Juan Manuel said. We are at around 4% drop in the sales. And in order to analyze the reasons for this drop, if we compare it to other sectors or other territories where this drop was higher, I think we should highlight this small reduction in the first sales in the fish auction markets. If I disaggregate them, I could say that the most significant group was the finfish, with a drop of approximately 2% if we compare it with the previous year. There was a big reduction in bivalves that dropped by 34% and cephalopods by 24%. As for crustaceans, the reduction was high, especially during the lockdown. But then, during the second semester, when we could leave our home, the restrictions were lower. The first sales of cephalopods reached the same values as in 2019. As for income, the amounts, the average prices of certain biological groups like finfish made the average income to be reduced. Also, we consider or estimate that the global reduction in the Galician fish auction markets was 11%, especially in bivalves and crustaceans. Even if at the end of the year they behaved very well, the lockdown, those 4 months of lockdown, really affected this species. This is also related with the Oreca closure, which damaged a lot the introduction of bivalves and crustaceans in the usual commercial channels that was Oreca. And then from a global point of view, 2020, if we analyze the average price, thanks to the growth of specific resources, the average price increased. If we think on the last decade, we have the third best value in the last 10 years when we talk about the average price. If we analyze this data per auction market, if you're not Galician and you hear about auction markets, you think about Vigo or Coruña. But if we hear talking about fish auction markets, we think about our small auction markets. So we have the big ones, Vigo, Celeiro, Coruña, Ribeira, and we have small ones where the volumes and the main income come from coastal fisheries and specific resources, crustaceans, bivalves, and their behaviors were completely different. In big auction markets, 97% of the sales are finfish. The reduction of income and volume was small. The impact was not very high because in those auction markets, they were the ones that supplied supermarkets, retailers, and they were the ones that were selling to households. But then in the small fish auction markets specialized in maybe coastal fisheries, as they depended more on the Oreca channel, they were more impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, especially during the lockdown when the Oreca channel was closed. If we analyze these small fish auction markets, I could say that there was a reduction of bivalves around 34% and cephalopods by 42%. This reduction of the amounts make the income from these biological products that have a higher value damaged even more these fish auction markets. So given this monitoring and follow-up during 2020, we identified the points where we had to act, and we prepared different lines of action. So for these small fish auction markets that were especially damaged in 2020, we created some action lines for longliners to help them to keep selling fish and keep working and operating until the lockdown was finished and they could recover their normal activity. These subsidies given to the auction markets and to the longliners included also state aid. They were called in 2020, they were processed in 2020, and they were paid in 2020. So these sectors could be helped to overcome the crisis. We also had other subsidies for the fleet, for the net makers, for fish gatherers, and they were processed with the FEMP and were also paid by the beginning of 2021. During the pandemic, we also heard a lot that we had to be in good shape. We had to have a healthy diet, and that's why we made the most of our promotion activities, and we launched a campaign called "We Are in the Same Boat" to raise awareness of the importance of eating fish and fisheries products, and to give value to the work of fishermen, fish gatherers, who were at that moment working a lot while we were in a lockdown, and they were eating fish thanks to their work. Thank you very much, Marta, for this excellent vision. This is what the regional government has done. And do you have any short or medium-term plan to continue with this recovery of the sector? Well, I think that our capacity of reaction during the crisis indicated that there are some policies that that we are on the right path, on the right track, that we can communicate with the sector, that we can monitor the reality and identify where to focus, and these take us to work towards developing certain tools that permit to get information from the sector. Also, we see how important is promotion. We have promotion campaigns for kids, for millennials, for the general public of fisheries products, to promote fisheries. And now we started this campaign called Galicia Sabe Amar, and it is a very important campaign that tries to explain and promote how important seafood products are for our healthy diets. And within this campaign, we are going to carry out different actions, forums to raise awareness about the importance of having a healthy life, healthy diet, and how important it is to eat fish in that diet. Identifying those points, giving more subsidies to aquaculture, to the fleet. We will continue with our previous aid lines, identifying where to help them. And finally, we expect those European funds to arrive as soon as possible so we can start working right away. I don't know if the ministry would like to talk about any short-term or medium-term initiative. Very quickly, because we don't have time. Yes. although we have seen that the fisheries sector is resilient and it can adapt to such a difficult situation, we need to learn from what we have lived and start measures that put the sector again in a situation that will enable them to face similar situations in the future. So we have called a plan that includes a series of activities and economic allocation of money to enable the sector to adapt to the needs and to the transformation of the sector, digitalization, fight against IUU fisheries, all these activities that will permit to comply the community regulations with the Green Deal, with the European fisheries policy, with the Horizon 2030, and we have started this program for all of that. Christophe, is there anything you would like to add from the European Commission? Yours is the last speech, so can you tell us about the role of EUMOFA and the role in Europe for this fight against the pandemic in aquaculture and fisheries? Thank you.
Okay, so very briefly on the future. Well, of course, EUMOFA will continue to monitor the evolution of the market and provide information, and will adapt to the evolution of the market, that's for sure. I can mention the crisis mechanism that was introduced in the proposal of the Commission for the new financial instrument. So this financial instrument, the MFAF, was adopted by the end of last year. But due to the crisis, crisis measures were introduced in the instrument. And basically, well, the idea is that if another crisis strikes the sector, we should not improvise. And so this mechanism will be triggered by the Commission in case the sector is hit by exceptional events that would lead to significant market disruptions. So that is one of the key measures for the future. Another measure is the elaboration of a contingency plan at Commission level. So this is driven by the Directorates General Mare, Agri and Sante. So the idea here is to have a structured framework in which all involved actors would be able to react to a crisis that would affect the food sector, whatever the sector, whatever the step of the value chain that would be affected. And in this structured framework, we have established the rules and procedures to communicate with stakeholders, to exchange information, and to decide how to proceed. Once again, the idea is to not improvise, to be ready to respond swiftly to a crisis. And this contingency plan will be adopted by the end of this month. On top of that, we carried out a Eurobarometer. The idea was to say, as I mentioned earlier, to what extent the consumers' behavior would have changed due to the crisis. And surprisingly enough, so this Eurobarometer was published a couple of weeks ago. Surprisingly enough, they do not seem to be any fundamental change in the consumers' behavior. But also most likely it's probably too early to draw conclusions, and this exercise will have to be repeated in a couple of years or so. So these are for the measures I would say for the future in a more structured way in order to not improvise and be ready. Now, if I come back a bit earlier, so we saw that the sector was hit very hard by the crisis, also quite differentially according to the different sectors of the fishery and aquaculture products. And we also have sectors that are particular to other food commodities in the sense that we have very perishable products, fresh products that are mainly destined to the HoReCa sector, a sector that is very dependent on imports from third countries, and also on aquaculture products, which live storage is very limited in time, both in volume and well, it's limited actually in time and volume. So that made the situation even more, I would say, difficult to handle. So what's happened is that as soon as the crisis broke out, most professional organizations contacted the European Commission in order to see how we could speed up the possibility to put liquidities for operators under the existing legal framework at the time. So basically, how we could speed up the spending from the EMFF, and also to obtain information on what was happening, because the sectors were contacted. I mean, all professional organizations, they were contacted by their members, but they were like half blind, if you like, not knowing exactly what was happening in other countries, what was happening in other sectors. So they contacted the Commission in order to provide this information on the market. So, and what we did at the same time, this is what I mentioned earlier, this big, let's say, asset that we have to be able to reach our stakeholders very rapidly is that we took the initiative to contact a variety of stakeholders to both gather information on what was happening, but also to identify what were their needs in terms of market intelligence. And this led DG Mare, the Commission, to take immediate measures. First of all, we drafted guidance to the attention of member states, explaining how within the existing legal framework it was possible to inject liquidities to the benefit of operators to support their activities. I would say hopefully at the time the EMFF was rather underspent for most of the member states. So this also led us some room of maneuver to inject rapidly liquidities in the markets. And also, as Jan-Erik mentioned earlier, we published very rapidly a weekly report on what was happening in the market, providing quantified data and analysis to all stakeholders. In parallel, the Commission also worked on the development of measures, first of all, that could be implemented during the crisis. At the time, we didn't know how long the crisis would stay, but we developed a package of measures that were available to member states and the sector, basically until the end of 2020, but retroactively from 1st of February 2020, and also the development of measures that would be, let's say, adopted on a more permanent way, and these are the measures that I just mentioned earlier. So concerning the measures that were put at the disposal of member states and operators in 2020, we have a whole package of measures that consisted in financial compensations to fishers for the temporary cessation of their activities, financial compensation to aquaculture farmers and processing enterprises for a suspension or a reduction of production, a suspension or a reduction in sales, additional storage costs. Then we had also the financing of working capital for aquaculture farmers and processing enterprises, and support to fishery and aquaculture producer organizations to resort to the storage aid mechanism. On top of that, and Spain is concerned, there were also specific measures to compensate the outermost regions. So that is really the measures that were adopted very swiftly to support the sector. Also at Commission level, so I would say transversal measures were a temporary state aid framework, increasing the ceiling from 30,000 euros to 120,000 euros per operator, per company. The coronavirus response investment initiative, that was another alternative source of financing to support measures to help the sector, and the SURE scheme, which is another mechanism aiming at supporting the risk of unemployment due to the crisis. So these are all the, let's say, the range of measures that were very rapidly adopted by the Commission. And on top of that, we developed the crisis mechanism that I just mentioned, the contingency plan that I just mentioned, and we continue, of course, all the market intelligence activities that we mentioned earlier. So that is it for the Commission side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christophe. One quick question. We will reduce it to just one question so we can close the meeting. What has been the role of the producers' organizations in this crisis?
Well, producer organizations, generally speaking, they are key actors for the implementation of the CFP that we know for a very long time. Also because they represent the majority of the landings in value and volumes of the European Union. But in particular, during the crisis, we could really rely on the producer organizations because they were able to react very promptly and to adapt the activities of their members to cope with the new market situation. So producer organizations could decide very rapidly on the rotations of the vessels, on the species that should be or should not be targeted for the moment. And that was, I would say, at the level of the planning of the production, but also in terms of marketing. Producer organizations were very reactive to find alternative market outlets for their members. And I mentioned earlier these short circuits, the e-commerce, the takeaway, etc., etc. So both at local level and also at, I would say, national level, regional level, the producer organizations, they were very reactive also to communicate with the retailers in order to launch campaigns to promote local consumption, etc., etc. So from that point of view, they've been very effective in dealing with the crisis. And on top of that, of course, they were allowed to resort to the storage mechanism because this storage mechanism was phased out with the EMFF after 5 years, and now it has been reintroduced, and not only for fishermen, but also for aquaculture farmers. And it was the responsibility of the producer organization to use this mechanism to the benefit of their members, and this is something that they did very effectively as well.
Now, Marta, Juan Manuel, Christophe, Jan-Erik, I don't know if you have any final message, very, very short, to conclude your speeches. Yes. I would like to say that if we want to recover from this crisis, it is essential that the public administrations and the sector work together, that we dialogue and agree, and that's the only way of achieving things. Juan Manuel, we are open to reach that consensus, and we need to coordinate our actions, and the most important thing would be the behavior of this sector and how it has been able to focus the problems and transmit the efforts made by the administrations to solve those problems. We need to be aware that we have all been affected. We've done our best, and we need to learn from our mistakes and improve in the future so the sector can be at the highest point to self-manage in these crisis situations. Janek, do you have any message, or Christophe, that you would like to share?
Well, I would say that what has been extremely important, and really we have to keep that in mind, is the importance to communicate, I would say, among administrations and with the stakeholders. And there I hope that the Commission can be seen not only as a regulator, but also as a service provider that is there to support what is its clients, basically, the sector and the national administrations.
Yeah, the discussion and the conclusion we have made is that it is very important to keep the supply chain open. When you manage to keep the supply chain open, you manage to have supplies to the market and get them distributed, and consumed in the market as well. So every measure possible and every support measures for keeping the supply chains open would be my message. Very important.
Good morning. Thank you very much. In this line of our last speaker, and making reference to what Christophe was saying, in this process we have all learned and we are more prepared in case there is a new similar situation in the future. So it could be very interesting, as the fisheries sector has been considered an essential sector, and we have seen how that supply of food was essential for our citizens. It could be important to take into account not only aids for the temporary cessation of the activity, but other lines of action and subsidies to compensate the losses of those vessels that were keeping their activity, and the prices that they were getting for their products could not cover the exploitation costs. I think administrations should have that reaction capacity there, so we don't prioritize only the cessations, the temporary cessations, but also to help those who don't have protection measures and kept working for all of us to have that supply of food. That's something we need to take into account in the future. Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't know if you want to say anything else. Christophe?
Just to reply to Madame la Ministre, I would say that it's something that we realized talking to fishermen, that some fishermen actually were hesitant and did not decide suddenly to stop fishing. They went fishing and they lost money for that. And so there was sort of a gray zone, and it's a feedback that we had from from the fishermen. Probably too late to adjust the measures at that moment, but it's something that we took good note of for the future.
Thank you very much. As we don't have time for questions, and the golden question has been asked by a regional minister, I think we should close this event. It's been extremely interesting. It's been recorded, so you can check it online on the EUMOFA website. And if you have any question, please don't hesitate to email EUMOFA with any suggestion or question you have. It is interesting to keep thinking, as with this question was said, anything can happen again, any other crisis can appear, so we need to be ready. So this has been very positive, and we would like to thank the speakers for their for sharing their point of view, and we hope the thinking will continue at the three levels of the administration, because we need to work together for the sector. So thank you very much. You can leave the stage, and we are going to continue with the closing, with the intervention of the General Director of the Ministry, Mr. Ignacio Gandaria Serrano. Good morning. Regional Minister, representatives of the Commission and EUMOFA. For the Secretariat General of Fisheries, it's a pleasure to be here today in this event, where we analyzed the impact of the pandemic caused by the COVID-19 in the fisheries sector, and in all the aspects of the industry and the aquaculture sector that have affected in a negative way the behavior of of the entire fisheries sector in Spain. I'm not going to repeat all the data. They are clear. I would like to insist in my intervention that there are two problems. One of them in the industry, in the fisheries and aquaculture sector, which was the continuity of the employment of these activities because of the infections of the COVID. During the pandemic, during the months of March to July, this was one of the main concerns. There were problems with the crew. The vessels had to be stopped because the crews were infected or because they had mobility problems because of the restrictions that were established at national level. And they could not reach their vessels. The processing and aquaculture sectors were also affected because the workers of these two subsectors also saw how their mobility was restricted and the access to the factories was restricted. And we need to acknowledge, and this has been said in all the interventions made by the ministry since July to now, we need to highlight the effort, and we would like to thank the fisheries sector as a whole, because they kept their activity. This sector was considered one of the essential sectors to guarantee the supply to the population of a raw material, which is fish, and is essential to feed the Spanish population and our exports. But their behavior has been amazing. They made so many efforts. They contributed with their catches, and aquaculture was also a sector that behaved so well because they kept working to offer their products to the Spanish citizens. The results that we have seen and you have analyzed, of course, there was a reduction of the catches, a reduction of the prices, a consumption channel was closed, which was that Oreca channel, because of the restrictions, and in other cases, like the canning sector, the consumer responded by acquiring more products and therefore increasing the sales. So, under this situation, I would like to thank and recognize the work of this sector and their workers because of their behavior. Within this response, there has been an important learning. And I would also like to thank the European Commission because of the response when the member states asked and they modified the state aids regime and the regulations of the European and Maritime Fisheries Fund, helping with those temporary stops of the fleets and allowing the storage, which was not allowed, so the producers' organizations could also use this regime and keep the prices, and establishing direct aids to the processing and aquaculture sectors because of their economic losses. This has been essential, and together with the European Commission, the member states, the General State Administration, and the regional administrations, together we have created a significant context to reduce, I'm not going to say eliminate, but reduce part of the damages to the entire fishery sector. There have been subsidies. The Ministry of Agriculture, in collaboration with the regional administrations, approved a package of aids in which the ministry was paying for the temporary stops of ship owners and crews, also the storage aids of the producers' organizations at national level, and the regional administrations also helped with the subsidies to aquaculture and processing. The ministry, and of course also the regional administrations and the Underdirectorate Marta already explained it, I think we have faced all the problems in a quick manner. The ministry that I represent here nowadays has already paid all the subsidies requested by the sector. To the ship owners, to the crews, to the producers' organizations, I think we've been diligent, and we processed a number that had never been processed in the past, almost 3,000 files of ship owners and crew members that have been solved in a very short period of time. And in July 2021, all these subsidies have been paid, as well as the aids to the storage of fisheries products for POs, and we are trying to pay all these subsidies applied for by the producer organizations that increased their production plans and executed in 2020 and are being paid now. I think the conclusions are important. There's been a joint action by all the administrations. We have worked together, and we have included our thoughts in the future Fisheries and Maritime European Fund. We have already mechanisms that can be applied in the future without waiting for decisions. As the regional minister already explained, there are other challenges, such as those possible economic aids to a sector that is keeping its activity, but is seeing how their income is reduced. We will have to think together with the Commission what kind of mechanisms we can offer to the sector to guarantee that their activity, if something like this happens again, because of the pandemic or because of something else, they will have a quick response and direct response with no need of taking decisions because everything is already established. I'd like to thank the possibility of participating in this event, and as the Commission mentioned, and we agree that the producer organizations are essential in the Ministry of Fisheries and Agriculture and Food, we consider the same. We believe that they are the institution that in crisis and no crisis times are the ones that can develop an activity for the sector to transform, to restructure, to improve from a technological point of view, and to innovate within all the fields that we can. Thank you very much, and I hope this event has been illustrative for all of you. Thank you very much. And to close this event, which has been extremely interesting, we are going to finish with the regional Minister of the Sea. Thank you very much, Rosa. Ladies and gentlemen and friends, good morning. I would like to start by saying how proud I am of sharing with you this forum. I am saying I'm proud because we can see each other after 1 year of silence and share with all of you this year of new noise in this exhibition. I'm also proud because yesterday we opened a new edition of CONXEMAR. what we consider in Galicia a unique window for our sea and industry, where we will see the potential of our sector and the strength of this sector that is still a milestone of Galicia. We joined this 22nd edition with the aim of showing the world that Galicia is an important part of the global market in which people buy and sell, that Galicia is in the world to fish, being present in more than 20 countries with local flag, and also present to process and commercialize our activity in more than 30 countries. With this international Galicia, you understand that our proposal is a warranty that the path that we have been following these years is the correct one, and that we must continue with this trajectory towards sustainability. It has not been easy in the last few years, and today we need to analyze the past to look at the future with trust. We are moving towards recovery, and we are convinced of it, but we need to do it recognizing the mistakes and the achievements of the past. That's why this forum is so necessary. This is a relevant event, and during this morning we've shared time, space, and experiences thanks to EUMOFA. The work conducted by their team has enabled us to analyze the volumes, the values, and the prices of the seafood products. It has also enabled us to interpret the first sale to the retailers' activities, including exports and imports. And it has enabled us to establish our support to the creation of policies that support the decision-taking processes. We are aware of this important work carried out by EUMOFA to face the impact of the COVID-19. We have all worked together to give the best practical and political response to this crisis. We have all had a single purpose to ensure the future of our sector, improving the resilience of our markets. I would like to highlight again the role played by the fisheries sector in Galicia during one of the worst and hardest times in these last 30 years. These years that I've been part of this sector, a sector of which I'm proud, of this fabric that I represent, and of a feeling that has never been as strong as today. The challenge was huge. This sector kept afloat, and it was there as it had never been before, always looking at the horizon of supplying food to the society every single day. They made a virtue of the need, and they improved even more their work. They kept working with responsibility, efforts, and sacrifice. We were with them, we were involved, and we faced the difficulties in line with them. And since the very first day of lockdown, we assessed all the problems that could appear. The turnover on first sales decreased by 25 million euros, and by 60 were those affecting the related sectors. The economic reduction in fish auction markets was between 15 and 50%, depending on the main resources. And the average sales between 15 March and 15 May was a reduction of 31%. The work dynamics were altered, the way of consuming changed, and online sales increased by 20%. Also, household consumption of fish increased, but not the sales prices. Sales fell in the Horeca channel because of the closure, and this especially impacted the shellfish gatherers and coastal fisheries. The first one dropped by 96% since the beginning of the alarm state until April 2020, and the second one suffered a partial closure, and it was maintained thanks to the household consumption with lower prices. The international demand was affected by the closure of borders and the logistic difficulties in the movement of crews and goods. Exports were reduced and especially affected the coastal and high seas fisheries, and these affected the prices and especially our exterior economy. As for the sea, the export of frozen and filleted products was reduced by 30% because of the commercial tension that affected some segments of the fleet, like the surface longliners. Given the high demand of these products for household consumption, the canning industry was still a driving force, with an increase of 3.5% thanks to the consumption of these types of products. In this negative context, we can say that the maritime and fisheries structure of Galicia supported the tensions of the pandemic. We didn't expect it to be like this because the future was uncertain, but we had to do everything we could to help them and prevent the loss of jobs. We started the Maritime and Fisheries Reactivation Plan together with the sector after talking with them and with the national and European administrations to try to reduce the consequences in the short term. We highlighted the need of modifying the FEMP to provide the available funds as soon as possible, and also the temporary stop to include the different sectors affected and expanding the subsidies to the ancillary and processing sectors in case of forced detention of the activity. In the CETMAR plan, we established socio-economic measures at medium and long term, and we injected and provided the sector with 77 million euros. We provided liquidity and solvency to our productive fabric to guarantee the sustainability and competitiveness against difficulties, and we helped the entire sector, especially those who could not benefit from the subsidies under the modification of the FEMP. There is still a lot to do. The recovery is being slow, and I am sure we will keep adapting. Everything has changed, and we have learned the true value of our product, and we have learned how to generate short cycles with a low footprint, carbon footprint, and with a close market chain. We have kept alive the activity of the sea. The world stops, but our sea continues sailing. We have learned to redesign our supply chains inside and outside our borders. We have learned how to sell online, a market that in 2020 increased by 93% on sales. The same digital online formula that nowadays enables us to be with many more people than those who are here today, sending our messages about COVID-19 in spite of COVID-19. We could answer efficiently to a society that demanded more fishing products during the pandemic. Everything has changed. We have changed too. We are people from the sea, workers with character. But nowadays, with this lesson learned, we can consider ourselves more prepared, stronger, and more competitive. And I would like to finish by saying thank you. Thank you to EUMOFA for bringing us together, for talking about Galicia as how it is, an example of working well and during good and bad times. And thank you to all those who have permitted the sea to work to the entire sector. Thank you very much for making Galicia taste like the sea again. Thank you very much.